All right, what's going on, everybody? White Rabbit here. So earnings is in 2 days. It's Sunday right now. Tuesday we get the earnings report for quarter 4, and I was actually just on my phone, and I was thinking about talking a little bit about sentiment, and the sentiment is a little bit bearish. And I just saw one article from Seeking Alpha, and it says, GameStop, even screaming kittens can't save it now. Strong sell. So, as the bearish narrative and the sentiment strengthens in a bearish way, it does naturally get me a little more bullish, especially for an earnings report, because typically mainstream media likes to push a narrative, especially when it's a strong narrative, so a strong bearish narrative. Typically, the opposite thing sort of pans out, right? And as someone who's a permabull on GME and GameStop, these are kind of the articles that I like to see, especially heading into a rather big earnings, quarter 4 earnings on Tuesday. So there are a few things to go over. We'll go over the chart a little bit, what price ended up doing Friday last week, where the volume's sort of been and everything, and how we're going into earnings, and a couple theses that I'm looking at. I saw Jackie Letitz present a really good thesis that I do like, and I think there's a good probability that that pans out. I'll go over a little bit, but make sure you check his stuff out to understand where he's coming from much better as he goes into pretty big depth. But that being said, and then I have my own thesis that I think has a good probability of having an outcome as well, and I'll tell you why. So to begin, taking a look at what happened last Friday, we kind of had a little bit of a breakout with volume here, right? I mean, we have seen some of the lowest volume in the stock's history. And when I say the stock's history, I know that last April, even February of 2024, we saw some historical lows in volume. We were also had 100 million shares less. So, there's been some dilutive events as well. So seeing this low of volume, it does make me think of a couple things here, right? Overall, it's been very, very dried up. So you get a little bit of a breakout here, right? When there's a nice big buying volume, it kind of breaks you out and you close above some resistance here, the middle of the Bollinger Bands, right? Strong breakout, looks good. Bollinger Bands are kind of squeezing a little bit, looking for price to hopefully continue breaking out. Now, these are going to probably stay squeezing, right? Tighten up a little bit until earnings. It is 2 days, and then you're going to get that pop in either direction. Now, what could price do, right? Because that's what we're here for. We're here to support the company long term, see it become very successful and everything, but we're also here to see the stock price reflect that, right? Reflect some positives. And there's two different outcomes I can see from this. So first off, this does look good, right? You see a nice volume coming in a little bit of a breakout here. Things are strengthening. Even RSI is back in the bull zone. It's at 52, and that hasn't happened. I mean, when's the last time it was in the bull zone? I mean, here it almost went in there and almost closed there, right? But you have to go as far back as January 13th. So almost, actually a little over 2 months since RSI has entered and stayed in this zone for the daily candle. So that is a positive development. We are seeing a little bit of a breakout, and if it wasn't earnings, because it is going to be a little bit of a deciding factor, right? If it wasn't for earnings, this would typically look bullish, but earnings is going to play a pretty big role into what price might do, and it could quite literally be up or down. So one thing that Jackie Letitz was kind of going into, and that I really like, is it's because it's been a repeated algorithm, right? You kind of get a rounding formation and then a pop. And that's what I like about both our theses, right? Both theses are kind of directionally up, right? At the end of the day, we're both kind of have futuristic price targets in an upward trajectory, which is good. And this rounding formation, it could present another buy-in opportunity, whether it's shares at lower prices or maybe IV stays relatively the same and maybe you enter some contracts at a little bit lower and then you see some pretty strong price action leading back upward. Now, my thesis is that earnings comes out a really good report because they're really lowballing this EPS here, 8 cents. I really think we beat that by 200% minimum. I'm looking at above 20 cents essentially. And then the revenue estimates, I went over this last video. I can understand the expectations for a declining revenue. There's been a good amount of closures and everything, but I'd like to think that in 2022, 2023, a lot of those closures already happened. And in addition, to support higher revenue too, is that PSA partnership, right? We're seeing revenue, some sort of revenue streams, maybe stabilize it, maybe increase it a little bit. So last year over year, right? Last year, it was about 1.79 billion. This year, they're expecting essentially a $300 million drop. And I really don't think it's going to be that low, even with some more closures and everything. So my expectations, maybe a 5 to 10% beat. Anything above that would be incredible. So, 1.55, 1.6 billion in revenue would be great. And to see a double beat is very uncommon for GameStop. And on top of that, to see a big double beat is extremely uncommon. So there's a lot of potential here on earnings where if GameStop does have a good report, we could see price action reflect that. And I am personally speculating a few things here. And one of them is the implied volatility. It is surprisingly not going up, right? Typically when GameStop has an earnings, within a week, 2 weeks, you see volume kind of have an uptick. IV starts bumping up, and it does like to hang around that 100 IV, maybe even higher, right? If the volume's kind of coming in, and we're not seeing that. And this is GameStop's biggest quarter, so if anything, it does remind me of quarter four for 2022, which came out March of 2023. And price had a very, very big breakout. I think a lot of you are going to remember that sort of God candle. Price was trading around like $17, and then after hours, I think it hit a high of around $28, $29. And I'm not saying that that's exactly what's going to happen, but during that time, you did see IV also extremely low, and volume was essentially very dried up. There was a lot of bearish sentiment, and the stock just popped. And it's a win for people trading options. It's a win for shareholders and everything. You want to see the company do good and beat analyst expectations. But at the end of the day, for market makers too, they could have dried this thing up, had it trade completely sideways, feed some bearish narratives, and then, if price were to go up into the $37, $38 range, or anything relatively above $30, they'd be able to sell contracts to traders at a much higher premium. And I think that's potentially what could happen, right? Not much interest in GameStop right now, besides your typical buy and hold crew, right? And if price does have that sort of explosion to the upside, I think that's going to have some FOMO come in. People are going to kind of buy a lot up here. And then I think we enter some of those cycles. And if you're not familiar with cycles, I think Richard Newton does a good job at going over some of these cycles. One of them is largely involved with April. So we'll come back to the cycles if my thesis is correct. right? Because I do think we get that breakout upwards, and then I do think that April's part of the cycle. April does have a little more of that downward price action, but there is going to be good news after that because May does typically see a good bounce back. And I do want to just head over to maybe we'll do the 1 month. Let's do the 1 month. Because on the monthly chart, I mean, so look at this. When volume came in and we sort of broke out from a little bit of these tweezers, volume picks back up and then price goes up. People show interest down here, right? We're creating higher lows and everything. And then we kind of break out. So volume really comes in. This month here for November, we had 259 million. For December, 281 million. And then we see a huge bearish engulfing off of more than half of that volume, right? So we're seeing huge declining price off of extremely low volume, and then it decreases, right, from 135 to 110, and now we're sitting at 60 million volume, and we're very, very close to the end of the month. So we did just also have March OPEX on Friday. We're going to see T+1, T+2 settlement as well on earnings, Monday, Tuesday, and everything. So I would suspect a lot of volume sort of coming in. And that does kind of support my thesis into a larger breakout, right? See volume kind of bounce back up, see some really good positive price action. Maybe we can enter a little bit of like a bull flag or something. So let's see what happens. And I'm positioned accordingly for my own personal finances, as you should too. Do what is best for yourself. As far as trades go, I'm a long-term shareholder. Trades, I have some leaps. YOLO'd a very small portion for weeklies because, I'm going to gamble. I'm going to bet on my own personal thesis, see if it does hit or not, and then see what happens. If by Tuesday, let's say price does aim towards $26, maybe you see some volume come in, IV start going up, and I'd be up on my weeklies a fair bit, and I'd be willing to take some risk off at that point. But other than that, I kind of plan to hold my current position with shares, leaps, and weeklies as well. So overall, I think it's going to be a good earnings. It's just a lot of it is going to be a little speculation until we get the report, right? Because we don't get too much information. What we could really do is just kind of see what the chart's telling us. And, it's a little back and forth. We do need volume, but, there could be a dilution too. I don't think that's a likely thing that's going to happen, especially for something like Q4. I think if anything, it's let's get the momentum back in the stock. GameStop comes out with a strong report. Things look good. Brings maybe more retail traders, piques their interest, right? Because I know that there's a lot of diamond-handed folks, the GameStop crew and stuff. There's a lot of interest in there already, but as institutional investors' holdings increase their positions quite largely, right? We're seeing some records, historical records with that. Then I think more FOMO will kind of come in. So let's see what happens. I'm extremely excited to see what happens. I'm very excited to see how the company did for the entire year and for Q4 as well. I'm excited to see whether or not maybe they invested some of that cash. I do think Ryan Cohen knows what he's doing, so whenever he plans on investing that, he can invest it. But let's see what happens with earnings, and then we'll go from there. We'll create a new thesis, right? Because we need to see a little more data presented in front of us to understand maybe a different trade, or maybe you want to wait until cheaper prices to buy a little bit more shares, and just kind of stuff like that. So if you made it through the video, maybe feel free to leave a comment. Maybe you want to share your strategy. I'd love to hear it, or maybe just comment Q4 earnings GameStop or something. But anyway, I appreciate your time, and I'll see you guys Tuesday. Cheers, everybody.